Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Viewers, as you know, the United Nations, that all encompassing organization that presides over the world, is in the news almost every day. But what exactly is the United Nations about? What role does it play at a time it seems that it is going nowhere? Where exactly is India placed in the United Nations? Shouldn't India be in the UNSC? To discuss all this and more, I have someone who knows the UN inside out. Welcome, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj. And she was permanent representative to the United Nations in New York until May last year. She's also the first lady from India to have presided over the UNSC in December 2022. Welcome, Ambassador Kamboj, to the show.
Thank you, Joyeeta. It's a pleasure to be in your program, and my greetings to all your viewers.
And it's a privilege for me that you are here.
Likewise.
So, okay, now the thing is, the first question, Ambassador Kamboj, is of course the relevance of the United Nations. At a time when it seems there are so many wars going on in the world, and it seems that no one really listens to the UN anymore. So, what exactly would you say that the UN's voice is failing, that it is losing its relevance?
Well, Joyeeta, thank you very much. I think that's a very relevant question. And frankly, I think many people, not just you, have been saying the same thing, that multilateralism is in decline, that it is failing. Some have even written the obituary of multilateralism. And I think to a very large extent, given the nature of the world today, much of this is understandable. But your question to me was, is the United Nations failing? Well, let's first look at the conflicts that are raging across the globe, many more than ever, as we are told, and particularly the two big conflicts, Gaza and Ukraine. And in fact, the question that is being asked now, that if its primary organ, which is the United Nations Security Council, which is tasked with the maintenance of international peace and security, is failing to secure the peace, what is it securing? So I think that is a very relevant question. Now, there are no easy answers. If you ask me, and if I were to give you a short answer, I would say that the solution doesn't lie in abandoning multilateralism. The solution lies in reforming it.
So, what is the way forward for the UN? And if you can also talk in terms of the need to reform the UNSC.
Well, I think the crying need of the time, if I may say so, is indeed to reform the United Nations. Now, the world, I'm sure you'll agree with me that the world of 1945 cannot govern the world of 2025. The dynamics were completely different. If you look at 1945, when the United Nations was formed, there were just 51 members. All of us know that. And what is the membership of the United Nations today? Just look at that. There has been a fourfold increase, but the structures have been frozen in time. And there has never been a serious attempt at reform, except the one time when the number of non-permanent members were increased. And the world has completely changed today. There are so many new and emerging powers, countries that are bringing solutions to the table. Look at Africa. It has a population of 1.4 billion people. And 70% of what the Council does impacts Africa, but Africa is not a permanent member of the UN Security Council. What about India, the world's largest democracy, the fifth largest economy, and a country that is actively bringing solutions to the table today? Certainly, there is a very strong case for India to be on the Council. What about Brazil from Latin America? So there is a very strong case for countries from the South, from the unrepresented regions, the underrepresented regions, to be on the Council, to bring a greater diversity of voices on the table, to bring a greater democracy on the table so that decision-making can be more legitimate and simply more effective. And until that happens, the UN, I'm afraid, is going to be just a ceremonial institution. And very quickly, if it is not already being done, much of the work will be shaped by regional alliances or by military blocs.
Can you elucidate that point a little more?
Well, there are many other regional alliances where work is being done. There's the G20, which India just chaired. There's the G7. There is the BRICS. There are so many other organizations. But the only thing that goes in the favor of the United Nations here is Can these other organizations do the work that the UN does? Sure, of course they can, and they are doing that work. But the UN is the only organization that brings all 193 countries in across one platform. No other regional alliance or bloc has the universality of the United Nations and therefore the legitimacy of the United Nations. Some of the other regional alliances, their mandate is more exclusive or it is issue specific. The United Nations deals with the entire range of issues, from peace and security, of course, to development, to human rights, and today also to digital governance, the governance of artificial intelligence, for example. So there is no other organization that has this sweep that the United Nations has. But it is not enough for the United Nations to rest on past laurels. And sure, it has done a lot of good work in the past. You're also aware of that. For example, the World Health Organization did excellent work in the past on chickenpox, on polio. And the UNICEF has done excellent work on children's education. And the World Food Programme and many other humanitarian agencies are also doing excellent work on the ground. But the United Nations does badly need to reform because, as I said, if it doesn't, then it is stuck in time. It is not serving the purpose for which it was actually created, which is to create a safer and a better world. And also, Joyeeta, I think I should bring this point out that the nature of the problems that the world is facing today, look at any of the problems. Can the world go it alone? Look at climate change. Look at terrorism. Look at pandemics. Or even look at digital governance. Can any one country go it alone? So you do need the United Nations, but a reformed United Nations that is in sync with the times and which is reflective of current geopolitical realities, which is not the case today.
So, interestingly, amid this, not many people may be knowing about it. Pakistan is suddenly in the UNSC.
Not
How did this
suddenly.
happen? I mean, I know, but for our viewers, yes, it is suddenly. How did this happen and why couldn't it be prevented? And what does it mean for India to have Pakistan as a temporary member, of course, of the UNSC?
Well, there are a couple of points here. First and foremost, when you say prevented, well, there is no veto in the United Nations General Assembly. The veto is only in the UN Security Council, and all elections are held in the General Assembly, so there's no veto. Each and every country is eligible for an election in the UN General Assembly, provided it is a member of the United Nations, provided it has paid its annual dues, and provided it is from the region where a seat is vacant. And by the way, this is not the first time that Pakistan is in the Security Council. This is its 8th term in the UN Security Council. So the elections in the UN General Assembly, just to tell our viewers, follow a certain procedure, which is clearly laid out in the United Nations Charter. And according to Article 23 of the Charter, all such elections are held in the UNGA once a year, and any country which secures 2/3 of those present and voting is elected to the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member, which means that if all 193 countries are present, then you need 129 votes to win an election. Voting is by secret ballot, and as I've already said, every country is eligible to contest for elections. So in that way, Pakistan is in the UN Security Council, but for the 8th time.
And how many times have we been there?
Also 8 times.
8 times. So, what does it mean for India? Can Pakistan make life difficult for India being part of the UNSC?
Well, I wouldn't look at it that way.
Okay.
We function according to our national priorities and for the collective good. And India has demonstrated time and again, including in its most recent tenure, that the national self-interest, which is always supreme, and the collective good, they can work together. And when you look back at our recent tenure in the Security Council, whether it was about reformed multilateralism, which we spearheaded, whether it was about countering terrorism, whether it was about the safety and security of peacekeepers, whether it was about maritime security, whether it was the entire gamut, the entire spectrum of the development agenda, India held its own. And that is what we do very well at the United Nations and will continue doing so, irrespective of who is in the council.
So, when we are talking about the UNSC, And India, of course, not being a member, permanent member. Especially, this has to be seen in the context of China. We are talking about a thaw in India China relations. But at the same time, it seems it is the China, primarily China, that is the reason why we are, there is no reform of the UNSC happening. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And do you think China will ever support India's membership of the UNSC, permanent membership?
Well, these are many questions rolled into one, directed at one particular country. Well, the blunt answer to your question is we don't know. Nobody knows. Will they allow us? Will they stop us? Will they prevent us? Will they block us? Nobody knows. But what I can tell you that there is an ongoing process at the United Nations in New York. This is the process that goes by the name of the Intergovernmental Negotiations on Security Council Reform. And we must not forget the larger objective of that process. What is the larger objective? It is to achieve and arrive at a United Nations that is fit for purpose. Fit for purpose for 21st century governance, for the modern day challenges that confront the world today. So that is the larger purpose. Now, if you ask me, the reform and expansion of the UN Security Council is perhaps the most complex process in the United Nations today, and I would say the most difficult process also. And if you ask me why, quite simply because it potentially could change the balance of power. The balance of power, which was established post 1945 when the United Nations was born. So each and every country has a certain way of looking at this issue. Each and every country has a certain perspective. And also, each and every country has its own strategic considerations. So the purpose of diplomacy is to navigate these considerations very, very carefully. I would say it is not about who will allow who and who will block who. Firstly, the entire process of elections is conducted in the United Nations General Assembly, where every country has one vote, where every country is equal. And it is the General Assembly, which is supreme, which will decide which country will get into the United Nations Security Council as and when this is expanded. And importantly also, the objective of all of us, 193 member states working together, let's not forget that, which is to create something that is more impactful and more effective for the world of today, which is far more complex. So I think that is what is critical and what is very important. It's an ongoing process. And let me also underline the fact that it is in every country's interest to reform the United Nations to make it more effective for 21st century governance.
Well, this is a question I'm certain you know. Of course. Who decides how India votes at the UN? Is it decided at in Delhi, or is it the permanent representative who is there at that time? Who decides how India will be voting? And because you see, there has been some unhappiness in India among certain sections saying that we consistently keep voting against Israel for that sometimes. So, how does this voting process takes place?
Well, let me tell you, we are not alone in this. I am not aware of any permanent delegation at the United Nations in New York, or in Geneva for that matter, that decides on its own. It is just not like that. The permanent missions in question, they report on developments, carefully study the situation on the ground, and make very carefully considered recommendations to their respective foreign ministries. And I think almost all of them, without exception, should be getting instructions from the capital. That is how it works. That is how it operates. You are the foot soldiers on the ground. You give a very carefully considered recommendation and you send it back to the capital. And most of us receive our instructions from the capital. And India is no exception to that.
Okay. Now, of course, then, who prepares this is everybody wants to know, because, who prepares the replies that India's juniors read out primarily in response to the attacks by Pakistan?
Oh, well, let me tell you this, that
Because these go viral, these statements go viral.
No, I'm aware of that. Well, let me tell you, every statement that India makes at the United Nations is a national position. Now, national positions are especially on key political issues, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is Gaza, whether it is a certain situation in Africa, those positions are the handiwork of multiple levels. Certainly, at the ground level, at the permanent mission, a statement is very carefully crafted. And then, certainly, there is a discussion with subject experts back home and with the larger foreign policy establishment. And the point, Joyeeta, what I very strongly feel about is that it doesn't matter who makes the statement. It really doesn't matter. What really matters is the weight of the statement and how it advances your bilateral and multilateral objectives. I think I missed a point from a question that you have just asked. Did I hear you say that there was some unhappiness over
No, in certain
voting?
sections, not, I'm not saying talking, people think that maybe we can be considering that Israel is a partner, strategic partner and all. We often see that much of the voting, it's always goes against Israel. Is that a case?
Well, I'm not too sure where this is coming from, but to the best of my knowledge, I did not get this feedback from anywhere else. If you look at the situation in Gaza, I was there when the conflict broke out, 7th October 2023. India's stand, India's position has been very clear and I would say very consistent from the outset. We condemn the terror attack of October 7 without a doubt. Terrorism is pure evil, period. And India condemned the terror attack. But at the same time, India was very concerned about the humanitarian situation on the ground, about the fact that international humanitarian law should be respected, that the situation on the ground cannot be countenanced any longer. And we ourselves contributed to the relief efforts of UNRWA. And again, we reiterated our position that we believe that the process should be taken forward, that the solution should be found through dialogue and through diplomacy. And however ironical as it may sound, today, as we speak, we supported, as did many other countries, a two-state solution. So our position was very clear, very consistent, and we were not in the Security Council when the conflict broke out. So we did not have to take decisions within the ambit of the Security Council. But when the Security Council, you would recall, failed to pass any resolution on a humanitarian ceasefire, or the release of prisoners simply because there was one veto or the other, then the matter reverted to the UN General Assembly, which is like a people's parliament. Every country could speak and every country could vote when there was a vote. And I remember making several statements on India's position, both as statements and as explanations of the vote. And India was very clear, very consistent. We condemned terrorism, so we condemned the attack of October 7. At the same time, we were very clear that the situation on the ground was very dire. It was not acceptable, and we called for a humanitarian ceasefire as we offered to help and provide relief to the citizens on the ground and advocated for a two-state solution.
How tricky is a diplomat's job at the UN?
Well, I would say as tricky as the world is today.
Okay.
No, seriously speaking, at the United Nations, you need a very special set of skills. You are constantly navigating between national self-interest and the greater global good. You are navigating between the major powers and you're navigating between the emerging powers. You are working with the small states and you're working with the small island developing states. And mind you, in an atmosphere where consensus is very elusive, we all know about the polarization at the United Nations, which is very real, not just in the Security Council, but in the General Assembly as well, across all its committees. And then something I'd like to also point out now that you raised the question, the United Nations is not just about speeches. I mean, that's there, of course, and everyone sees a speech being made. But it is also a lot that goes on behind the scenes. You have to work towards a convergence when there is only divergence around you. You have to work with structures in the UN system that are very slow, very bureaucratic. In fact, the UN bureaucracy is as bad as or as good as a bureaucracy in any other part of the world. And you have to work within a system that is not reformed as yet and is therefore not legitimate. And then there is also a lot of talk about negotiations at the United Nations. Sure, there is a lot of negotiation that we do and a lot of resolutions that are adopted. But it is about ensuring that those resolutions translate into real world impact. And that is where I would say diplomacy moves from the art of words to the test of results.
Were you there at the time when this Ukraine-Russia broke out?
No, I came after that.
Okay.
This broke out in February 22 and I reached there in July 22.
Okay. So, how tough was your job as a permanent representative of India to the UN? I mean, what were your achievements in particular?
The achievements question is very controversial. It's more for the others to judge, but let me attempt an answer. As far as the first part of your question is concerned, how tough was my job? Well, I don't look at it like that. If you like something, if you enjoy your work, there's nothing tough. Rather, you enjoy your work. So I enjoyed my work. I enjoyed my assignment at the United Nations. As far as achievements is concerned, let me tell you that there was a lot of action at the time that I was there at the United Nations. Firstly, we were still in the Security Council, and there was a very important meeting that happened in India. Let me take you back to October 2022. India was the chair of the Counter-Terrorism Committee, which is one of the most important committees of the Security Council with high importance and high influence. And in October 2022, for the very first time in the history of the Security Council, all 15 members came down to India for a meeting which focused on countering terrorism, which is a national priority, as you know. And these were all 15 members of the council, senior secretariat officials, non-governmental organizations, civil society, all converged for 2 days. One day in Bombay, where there was a symbolic remembrance of the victims of 26/11. It was a very somber ceremony. And then the actions shifted to New Delhi. And there were at least 6 ministers from the 15 council members, and all others were represented at a very senior level. But lest you think that it was only ceremony, there was a lot of substance to this meeting, because the meeting ended up with adopting the New Delhi Declaration. And the New Delhi Declaration focused on 2 very critical aspects. One, the need to counter terrorism unitedly. There is no good terrorism, there is no bad terrorism, is what India said. Terrorism is terrorism, and we all need to unite to fight back against this scourge. And the second very important thing was the misuse of new and emerging technologies by terrorists and how to counter this, including the financing of terror, how to counter this. So I think this was a very important meeting with a very substantive outcome, which has contributed to an emerging dialogue at the United Nations. Then, of course, in December, India was the president of the UN Security Council, where I had the honor to be the president. And we had 2 very important signature events. The one focused again on terrorism. And we emerged, despite the polarization in the council, with a presidential statement that took forward the essence and the substance of the New Delhi Declaration of October 22. We also had a second signature event on reform multilateralism, which is also a very important priority in India's foreign policy. And how can I forget, on the softer side, we inaugurated a bust of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, in the prestigious North Lawns of the United Nations. Now, this involved a lot of back of the stage negotiations with UN authorities, because everything is pretty complex there, getting a very prestigious location, but we were very happy to have done it. And we also organized a lunch, a very special lunch for the 15 members of the council in the month of December, featuring only millets. So further on, as we got off the council, we kept up the momentum. It's not that while we were in the council and then what did we do after that? After that, I remember we took forward a very important dialogue on the safety and security of UN peacekeepers. As you know, India is one of the largest and certainly one of the most distinguished contributors to UN peacekeeping, and we're very concerned about the safety and security of all UN peacekeepers. As the Indian Prime Minister has said, even one life lost is one life lost too many. So we took forward this very important dialogue with very substantive outcomes. And then, linked to UN peacekeeping, India moved a very important resolution in the General Assembly on a peacekeeping memorial wall, for which earlier the Prime Minister of India had said that India stood ready to commit financially towards the erection of such a wall that pays a tribute to the ultimate sacrifices that all soldiers have made. And guess what? This is the one resolution in UN history that has got the maximum number of co-sponsors, more than Nelson Mandela Day, more than International Yoga Day. 190 countries, which is virtually the entire membership of the United Nations, supported this resolution that India moved on a peacekeeping memorial wall. So India holds that distinction now. And of course, everyone knows, you would recall, that Prime Minister Modi led International Yoga Day celebrations on June 21, 2023. He himself led the celebrations, and in the process, India set a Guinness World Record of the maximum number of nationalities in any one yoga session, which was 135. There were many, many other memorable moments, I would say. Perhaps we can do it some other time.
Yes.
But there were some soft power initiatives also we took, like we had an international conference on Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. And also importantly, this soft power of India through its digital diplomacy, the India Stack, which we call the Citizen Stack, that was introduced in the United Nations, and it evinced a very, very positive response.
Yeah. Now, so to end this, basically what you're talking about is that the UN is in dire need of reform. All right. Apart from that, because you see, when looked at from the common Indian's perspective, what they see is that while there is so much work happening in terms of, anti-terrorism, but there are powers that are blocking, say, for example, India's attempt to, call somebody a global terror. And it takes a lot of diplomacy and behind the scenes work to even say, one of them to make them, globally designated, UN designated terror. So how exactly, this is ultimately all about politics, countries playing politics, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is about politics. There is no doubt about that. And because the United Nations Security Council is so skewed that 5 countries have the veto, well, then it becomes very easy for any of those 5 to put a hold on anything that they may not like. And that very often may or may not sync with the greater global good. It is politics, as you say. So that is the reality that we contend with at the United Nations. And therefore, I repeat again, it is absolutely imperative that the UN is reformed now. The good news is that the majority of member states in the United Nations do want a genuine and comprehensive reform. There is a smaller group of naysayers, but the bulk of the membership does want that. Now, when will that happen? There is an ongoing process. There is an ongoing conversation. When will that happen? That is part of the larger journey.
Okay, thank you for that illuminating conversation. Viewers, I hope you now have a better understanding of the UN. I'm certain Ambassador Kamboj will be coming one day and we will have a conversation in greater detail. Thank you, Ambassador Kamboj.
Thank you very much, Joyeeta.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.